Hello everybody. Now just a few little checks to make sure that I'm coming through loud and clear. There's obviously a lag between what I'm doing and what is happening on the screen, so I'm hoping that Vicky is gonna let me know as soon as she hears what's going on, and make sure that you can actually hear me. I'm just going to quickly go and look at the comments now and just make sure that you can all hear me. I had to set my computer and everything up again this morning. Oh, fab. All's good. Brilliant. Marvellous. That's good to hear. I've got Vicky here on Messenger just in case. So welcome everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad you're here today. I'm sure there are lots of people who've already been on a live draw with me. And I'm sure there are lots of people here who have not been on a live draw with me. All I can say is we're going to have a lovely, lovely couple of hours. I'm going to be going slowly. I can hear the cheers from all over the world sitting here. Yay, we're not doing a speed drawing. We're going to be going nice and slowly, and we are going to be drawing the eyes today. So we're going to be drawing the eyes. Next week we're going to be drawing the ear. Which I don't think you can see on my screen, but there's an ear up there somewhere. And then I'm going to create the rest of the piece as a tutorial that you can find in the Academy. So you can either draw it all yourself, learning what we've learned today and next week, or you can finish it off if you want to join me in the Academy. So really, really excited to be drawing with you today. This is one of my most favourite things to do, teaching live. I absolutely love it. So, without further ado, we are going to get cracking. I'm just going to text Vicky again. Any probs, let me know. I have to say a huge thank you to Vicky because she is the one that's kind of monitoring the questions, and she'll send me through things like questions that anybody's asking. Really happy to answer questions around what we're doing here, if I can do. So if you have got any burning questions, you're very welcome to ask them, and I'll answer them when I have sort of like a second. So we're going to get cracking. I'm working on pastel mat today. It's a sheet of pastel mat. It's not the board. I've got some really, really lovely smooth pastel mat. Obviously it's grainy like pastel mat all is, but this is a particularly smooth piece. Pastel mat is a really super surface. If you're not using pastel mat, please don't worry. You'll still be able to do everything that we're going to be doing here today. You might have a little bit more of a challenge getting light over dark, but we'll try and kind of work around that, particularly when we come to put light and everything in the eye. The majority of pencils we're using today are polychromos. I really like polychromos, particularly for eyes. The reason that I love polychromos for eyes is because they are more translucent than other pencil brands. They're hard and they're dry, and it means that when the pigment touches the surface of the pastel mat, the pigment actually sits on the top of the tooth, so that if you want to kind of blend it or move it around with another pencil, it's very easy to do that. If you're using more sticky pencils like Luminance, like Prismacolor, nothing wrong with that at all. But what happens is because the pigment is softer, it tends to stick to the tooth. And then in the early stages, it can be frustrating because it's a little bit harder to move around. Once you get to the latter stages, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever because you've got those layers of pencil. So we're going to make a start, and we're going to make a start again. Okay. Hang on a second. I can't see any. Right, so I'm going to make a start. So we're going to start with the dark sepia. This is, and I'll try and tell you the numbers as well as I go through, but I'm not very good with numbers. This is 175. Okay. In fact, I'm just going to bring this over here. Oh no, okay. Can you hear it very quiet? Right, okay, hold on. Let me just. Right, hang on. I'm just looking to see if I can sort this. Now then, don't want that one. using that. I'm just looking at the sound just to see if I can do anything about it. If you can hear me, Vicky, is the sound okay now? Has anything changed on the sound now? Just before we get started, because I just want to make sure that everybody can hear. So it's my usual setup, but like I say, I had to set all of my Mac up again. Yeah, so sound is all okay. Mic active. No, I think we're all okay with the sound. I think if you are struggling with the sound, then it's a case of just ensuring that you've got everything turned up at your end. I have got my microphone; it's literally right here next to me. So I'm just gonna crack on. Hopefully, be able to everybody okay. It's always a bit of a panic when you go live in case things don't work properly. Okay. Right, so we're going to start off with the Polychromos Dark Sepia, and this is the number 175. And what we're going to do is I like to work on the outside of the eye first. Okay, the reason that I work on the outside of the eye first is due to me wanting to get the shape correct. And it's also the shape, the size, all of that kind of thing, but also it looks much better. So if you have to get up for any reason and walk away from your drawing and you've only worked on the inside of the eyeball, sometimes it can look very, very strange. And that is one of the main reasons that I work on the outside before the inside, so that if I walk away or if I want to take a photograph or anything like that, it actually looks okay. So we've got our dark sepia, it's relatively sharp, and we're just going to make a start in creating the outside of the eye. So I'm going to, we can see where the eyeball is here, and I'm going to start by bringing just a little mark in there, and I'm going to bring it up, and I'm going to bring it around. We've got this very dark area on the top of the eye here, the inside of the eyeball, or the inside of the eyelid there, is very, very dark. And I'm just going to bring that in. Now I'm using very light pressure, really, really, really light pressure. If you imagine drawing on the back of your hand, that's my hand there, and your pressure needs to be so light that you're not indenting the skin. If you're indenting the skin like that, that's too, you can see I've actually drawn on my hand, that's too hard. You want to be going nice and gently so you can't actually indent the skin. That's the pressure that you want at this point. And I'm just going to bring that down a little bit. Oops. That's it. I'm just going to bring a little bit of that line down and around, and it kind of stops there. And then we've got this sort of curve coming all the way around the bottom here as well. So again, I'm just going to bring in a little bit of that, and then we've got the dark coming along the bottom. Now you can see with my pencil strokes, they're very soft, they're quite sketchy. They're not just a big straight strong line all the way down. That is because I want the softness. I want to be able to get the feeling of softness, of life and everything like that. I don't want to have like a really big strong line in there. So I'm being very, very gentle with my pencil. And then I'm just going to come down, and we're just going to bring in that little tiny bit of dark in the corner there. And then we're just going to gently just sketch in that colour. Now, the graininess is going to affect you if you allow it to. So the trick is not to allow it to affect you. The graininess is there because this is an abrasive paper, abrasive surface, and it's toothy, which means that you're going to be able to get an awful lot of layers in there if you want to. You don't have to put an awful lot of layers in, but you know, it's there if you want it. So if you make a mistake or if something's very complicated, you've got the ability to put lots and lots of layers in. There's all sorts of different techniques you can use to be able to get rid of the graininess quite quickly. which I'm going to go through as well. So we're just going to come back up here and we're going to bring in that top bit of the sort of like the inside of the eyelid there. So that top bit up there. And we're just going to bring that round just nice and gently. You can see again, I'm sort of doing these little tiny pencil strokes coming through there. And then what I'm going to do here as well, even though there's a little bit of detail within the inside of the eyelid here, I'm just going to block it in. So I'm just going to block all of that in there. So it's sort of darkish, using that nice light pressure. Now it's going to look grainy, okay, but don't worry, because we're going to come to that and we're going to sort it out. We're just literally looking at the outside of the eye and we're just kind of working those little bits out. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm just going to bring a little bit more down onto the bottom here. We've got a little bit of grey, so again some sketchy gentle pencil strokes just to get an idea of the bottom of the eye here outside of that eyelid. So just nice and gently, so we've got a really good idea about how that eye and everything is working. We're not looking at the inside at all. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a lighter pencil, and this is one of the key techniques for me for using pastel mat and getting the best out of pastel mat, using a lighter pencil to go over all of the dark that we've just done and smooth it out. Okay, so I want you to get hold of your Polychromos Warm Grey 2. Okay, so the Warm Grey 2 is the 271 and it's pretty sharp. And what we're going to do is, even though it sounds counterproductive that we want all of this dark, we're going to go in and we're going to put a second layer in over the top of this. And what's going to happen is the lightness of this pencil is actually going to smooth everything that's dark at the moment. The other thing it will do is it will make it slightly lighter, but we don't need to worry about that. But it's just the layering process that we're looking at the moment. So I'm going to come in here again. It's not about burnishing. It's not about going really, really hard and trying to push the pigment into the tooth. It's about just gently layering over the top. So nice gentle pressure again. And we're just going to bring that in over the top of the dark area that we've got there. And you should see immediately how this lighter colour is moving the darker pigment, and it's sort of blending and smoothing it. So you should end up with something looking lighter than you want it to be, but much smoother. And this is the key for getting the best out of pastel mat, using light colour over dark. Rather than trying to layer dark over dark over dark over dark, using the lighter colours just to sort of smooth and blend. Your light colour could be a couple of shades lighter than the dark sepia, or it could be much, much, much lighter. And you can use this trick with every single colour. Okay, so we've got that nice smoothness of the eyelid there. And then we're going to come back in again with the dark sepia. Now, I'm actually going to sharpen, my dark sepia is not actually that sharp. I just want to sharpen it a little bit more, particularly in the eye area, because I want to get some more finer details. So the pencil sharpener that I've got is the Swordfish Multi-Point. It's an electric one. I love it. It just sits next to my desk and I just chuck my pencil in, and within a couple of seconds it's lovely and sharp. So we're going to come back in here again, and we're going to just darken up the art. And you can see as soon as we put that darker colour then back in, it's looking smoother already. So I'm not using any harder pressure or anything like that, but it's looking smoother already because we've already got those two layers of colour in. I'm just going to sort of bring in a little, almost like a wiggly line on the top there, because we have got some little hairs that are sort of hanging over slightly. And then I'm just going to keep on. I'm going to bring the light in afterwards. Just going to darken all of that up in there. So my pencil strokes are little tiny backwards and forwards, nice and light pressure. Okay. Coming in there, which is good. And then I'm going to come back in here again, and I'm just going to bring a little. It's quite a fine line underneath the eye here. And because we've got that that warm grey 2 in over the top of the dark sepia, we should be able to get a relatively fine line. If you haven't, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, mine just looks so bumpy and whatever, you may have quite a grainy piece of pastel matte. So in which case you would need to go back over again with your lighter colour and then go back in with your darker colour. You know, but that is basically the technique I use for using pastel matte, light over dark. And you could do the same with dark over light. So if you're doing, you know, if you're working on a darker coloured piece of pastel matte and you want to do a lighter coloured animal, then you would use darker colours over your light colours. So if you were wanting white and you were using like the warm greys, you might put a warm grey 4 over the top of warm grey 2, for example. And that's going to have the same effect. So we've got a nice outline of the eye now. I'm sure there'll be some of you who'll have finished the eye by now, I'm sure. But I want to take it sort of relatively slowly, just so that everybody gets a chance to understand why I'm doing things and how I'm doing things. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually bring a little bit of warm grey in. So warm grey 4, which is number 273. Okay. And what I'm going to do with the warm grey 4 is I'm actually going to bring a little bit of fur around the edge of the eye. Again, this just helps me put everything into context so I don't have a floating eyeball. So I've got the warm grey 4, again, very, very gentle pressure. Now, there's lots of different variances in the value around the eye, and you'll see that there's quite a lot of little tiny light hairs coming through, and that's fine. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring the lighter hairs in afterwards. So I'm going to start off with the warm grey 4, which is it's a relatively, well, it's sort of like a mid-tone really. And we're just going to come in around the eye area here. So I'm using these little sort of sketchy lines. We're not going to try and draw any details or anything like that. We just want to get a vague idea of the fur coming around the eye, and it just gives it much more context when you start to bring the eyeball area in. So we've got a little bit of a darker area there, and then we've got this little area up here. Now if you start to try and get all of the details in now, and you start to try and draw all of these little fur lines in right from the beginning, you're gonna find it a challenge. I find it much better to ignore the details. So ignore the details completely, and then just trying to position my iPad so it works better for me. So ignore the details completely and concentrate on the lights and the darks and the colour. Okay, the details can come afterwards. So we're just sort of blocking in colour really. And once we've got a few layers in there and we've got, you know, an idea of where the shadows and the highlights and that kind of stuff sit, then we can start to bring in a little bit more detail. It's always a good idea to work in the direction of the fur. So this is a short-haired dog, so it's key that we get the fur direction spot on. If we don't get the fur direction spot on, we run the risk of changing the structure of the animal's face, because the fur and how the fur grows is directly related to what's underneath the fur. So you know, the structure of the skeleton and the skull and everything that's underneath it. So it's really, really, really important to get that fur direction going in the right place. And I would say for realism, that's one of the most important things to capture. You know, the fur direction. So now then, I've got somebody at the door now who's waiting. That's okay, my son's gone. I don't normally get people with post on a Sunday. So just coming through here, and we've got that nice sort of fur going on in there. Again, you can see it's quite grainy, so we'd need to come in and we'd need to just smooth it off a little bit. This time, I'm not going to use the warm grey 2. I'm actually going to use the cold grey 1. Which is here. So the cold grey 1 is 230. And if you just look at the difference between warm grey and cold grey, this is the cold grey on the bottom, you can see it's much more bluey and the warm grey is much more yellowy, much warmer. Okay, I like to sort of switch my cold and warms around, but for this I'm going to bring a little bit of the cold grey in again, just to sort of smooth it off slightly so that we don't have too much of that grain. So again, very nice and gently, nice gentle pressure. Remember the pressure test on the back of your hand, and I'm just very gently just smoothing this in over the top of that warm grey 4, and you should find that everything starts to just smooth off a little bit, and it just gives you a nice base to work with. And this is very much a part of the layering process. If you were using a hot press paper, you know, you would be layering not in the same way as pastel mat, but you'd still be layering. So a lot of people think that pastel mat takes longer to work on. A lot of people there's an awful lot of myths around pastel mat. It eats your pencils, you know, it's a sanded paper, all of that kind of thing, and then it's just not true. What eats your pencils is keeping them sharp. Now, with an eye like this, I do want to keep my pencils relatively sharp because we're working with tiny details. But because I'm using very soft pressure, I'm not going to have to sharpen my pencils on a regular basis. It's all going to work just fine. You know, whereas compared to something like a hot press paper, you do need to keep your pencil sharp an awful lot of the time because you're working with a tooth that is very different to pastel mat and you need to get into it. Okay, so we've got some nice colour around there. Now, this is no way finished because we need to put all of the details and everything in. But now we're at a point to be able to start working on the eye. So this eye, actually, it's a really, really nice eye to be working on. It is quite complicated in the fact that we've got some really lovely light areas in here. What happens when we start to draw with colour pencils and we're doing realism is that right from the beginning, when you start to put your layers in, it can look not particularly attractive. And that's another thing that we just have to kind of get away from, and we have to understand is just part of the process of using coloured pencils. So when we start to build up this eye, it's going to look a little bit strange at times, but that's okay because we're just going to keep layering and layering, and eventually it will start to look really, really realistic. So what I'm going to do is, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start with the dark indigo. So the dark indigo is number 157. Okay, it's a very dark blue. It's quite a dull blue. It's not vibrant. It's not like a royal blue or anything like that. It's just a very, very dark blue. This is very much a part of the recipe that I use all of the time when I'm working with, or when I'm drawing eyes. I'm going to be putting the pupil area in first, but we're going to be putting it in very, very gently. So everything's going to be very soft and gentle to begin with, and then as we put the layers in, we're going to gradually build up the vibrancy, the depth, and the richness of the colours that are in there. So again, very light pressure. We've got this little light area here, this catch light in the eye. We want to be careful to avoid that. And actually it's it's sort of like a curved line. So we can bring a curved line in there. We can bring a curved line in there, and we can bring a sort of like a straight line at the bottom. Okay, so we've got almost like an L shape there. And then, now this is really important, I see an awful lot of eyes that have beautiful round pupils, perfect round pupils. If you look at your photograph, you'll see that the shape is round, but it doesn't have a straight edge around it. The pupil sort of bleeds off into the rest of the eye. For me, that's a really important part of drawing animal eyes, that the edges aren't straight, aren't perfect. There's always a softness to them. Okay, so we're going to start and we're going to use very small round pencil strokes with light pressure. So it's not going to end up being really, really dark right from the beginning. And we're just going to start in this area here. I know there's a little bit of dark going through into there, and we'll add that later. We're just going to start bringing in this sort of very dark pupilly area here. So we've got an idea of where it comes out to, and we're just going to gently, just almost like it's sort of fanning out, gently bring that around. We don't want a big, round, hard circle. That's the last thing we want, because it's not going to look realistic, and it's just going to look too harsh. So just nice round pencil strokes. Doesn't matter if it looks really grainy and you can see lines and everything like that. We just want a general idea of where that blue blob is going to go, and then we can build on that as we build the rest of the eye. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to just start to gently build the eye and add some colour, and then we're just going to keep layering on the top of that. So I'm going to bring my dark sepia back in. So the dark sepia is the 175. And I'm going to come, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come around here, and I'm going to bring this area in around here, and bring that, there's sort of like a dark line around there before the white of the eye comes in. So I'm just going to come around here, again nice and gently, all the way around, down to the bottom of the eye here. And we can see on the bottom of the eye that there's quite a big shadow, and the big shadow comes sort of up to here where this next bit of light comes through. There's also this big white line that comes around the bottom as well. Again, because we're using pastel matte, I'm going to put that in afterwards. So I'm just going to bring this little bit of dark in. Again, very, very, very gently. Just this little bit of shadow down at the bottom. Okay. So, and again down here. Now I'm using my pencil sort of like in just to bring a little bit of that shadow up, so it's quite sketchy. And we've got that down there. Okay. And we've got this area just coming round here as well. Okay. So we've got a nice start of the eye there, and then we're just going to come up to the top, and we're going to do the same on this little bit here, where we've got this bit of a catch light. So I'm just going to bring a bit of a line in, just to show where that little bit of the catch light stops. And then we're just going to fill in this area here. So Vicky's just sent me a question, which is a really great question. If I was drawing something in orange, would I still use grey to smooth it? So you can do, absolutely. Depends entirely really on the subject. If you were to use an orange, so say we were using something like this, and we wanted to smooth it, you could absolutely use a warm grey. I would steer away from using a cold grey, because you've got the blue and then you've got the yellow of the orange, so you might get a bit of a greeny colour. But yes, absolutely, you could use a warm grey, or you could even use something like a pink. You could use that as your light colour, depending on what it is that you're drawing. Because don't forget, once you layer over the top of it, you're going to kind of not obliterate, but you know, the light colour is more there to just help smooth and blend rather than add a colour. Or you could use something like an ivory, or you could even use something like a white, but I would steer clear of polychromos white, because you'll struggle to get any other colour in over the top of it. Right, okay, so coming back to the dark sepia, again, I'm just going to bring a little sort of touch in there. So we're really starting to get a feel for this eye now. I know it's we're kind of blocking it in, and we're going nice and slowly, hopefully. I want to just bring, there's another dark area that's coming in on the top of the eye here. There's sort of like the eyeball area, and I'm just going to bring a little bit more of that down and around. Now, the other thing is, don't worry if you get something that isn't exactly the same as the photograph, please don't worry. We're not looking at creating an exact replica of a photograph. That is never ever my intention when I draw. My intention when I draw is to, number one, really enjoy the process. I'm just going to get my water. Really, really enjoy the process. That's my number one intention. And number two is to create something that has a look and feel of the actual real animal. It's not to make a replica of the photograph, so don't worry if you don't have it exactly the same. Right, okay, so we've got this little bit of dark coming down here, which is really nice. Yes, it's still looking grainy, but we're not panicking and we're not worrying about it. So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to bring in a little bit of the colour that's in the iris of the eye. Now this is a really unusual colour that we've got here. It's quite grey, but for me there's sort of like some tinges of, little tiny tinges of green in there, and there's some little tiny tinges of blue in there. We're going to start with, I think, the warm grey 2. So the warm grey 2 is the 271. And what we're going to do is we're just going to plot in the colour. So this colour I see as being the lightest colour that we've got in the eye, and then we're going to mottle and bring in the layers of the darker colour on the top. So we're going to start at the top here. We need to obviously be very aware of the catch light here. So I'm just going to kind of bring a little bit of a line in there as to where it sits. I've got it, you know, obviously with my line art, but I'm just kind of looking at my reference photo rather than working with exactly what I've got on my line art. Very, very important to always follow your reference photo rather than trying to fill a line art in. So I'm going to use these little tiny round pencil strokes again, and I'm just going to bring in this one colour over the eyeball, and I'm going to miss out these two big catch lights because they're going to come later. So round and round, gentle pressure, always gentle pressure. We can come in over these dark areas because that's just going to smooth it out a little bit, which is quite nice. We're going to come in over here. Again, we're just going to come in over that little bit of dark shadow that I put in there. And I'm going to bring that in. So that is the first part of the eye basically in there. I want to get all of this up to a certain sort of depth of value before I start to bring this little bit in here, because otherwise, because of how our brain works, if we start to bring some of these darker elements in, actually what can happen is we'll end up missing this highlight out here, and this highlight is actually really important, you know, to the lighting of the photograph, and our brain is very good at just kind of filling things in and forgetting that we're supposed to be doing something else. You know, so it's very important for me to work on the richness of the majority of the eye and then go and kind of work on those bits. So we've got this nice light area in there now. What I want to do now is bring a little bit of that dark indigo in places. So the dark indigo is the 157. Now, I don't practice these drawings before I actually do them live. I much prefer to work on something and just go, right, this is how I'm going to work on it, blah, blah, blah. I've obviously looked at the photograph and decided on what colours I want to use, but this is the first time I've actually drawn this particular eye. So it's all very new to me as it is to you, and that's how I prefer to work that way. So I'm just going to come into the eye, and hopefully you can see that there's little areas of, they're sort of like little blobs of darker colour, and for me I'm seeing quite a lot of blue in there. You might see a different colour, you know, but for me I'm definitely seeing some sort of tinges of blue coming through there. So I'm just very gently just bringing in a little bit of mottling. Now what might happen now, and this can be a little bit confusing to a lot of people. I'm just going to bring a little bit of blue into that dark area there as well. So this can be quite confusing. A lot of the time when we bring colour in as part of a layer, it then gets completely obliterated with the next layer that you put in. And I do get quite a few sort of people saying, well, hang on a second, what on earth was the point in bringing that layer in if you're just going to go directly over the top and obliterate it? And for me, the point is, I'm just going to bring a little bit of that dark indigo through into here as well, It's just going to, it creates just a nice rich colour rather than it just being a single colour. And that's exactly why I would add a colour and then maybe obliterate it. The reason being is that it adds to the overall effect. And that's why pastel mat is so wonderful, because if you make a mistake, you just layer over the top of it and it just becomes part of everything that you were doing before. You know, it becomes the part of the final piece. So I'm just going to take my dark indigo now and I'm just going to darken up this area here. So this is really quite dark now, the centre of the pupil here. So what I've done is I've just increased my pressure by a tiny weeny amount, so that when I put my pencil onto the surface, I'm getting a little bit more pigment out of my pencil. Okay, it's still quite grainy, and I'm probably going to come over it in a minute with a lighter colour just to sort of smooth it out a little bit. Make sure that you do get this little bit here, because the pupil, actually, you can see on part of that catchlight, it comes all the way round. So it is round, but it's not got that beautiful smooth line around it, smooth circle around it. It's quite soft, and it just sort of fades out into the rest of the eye. Okay, and then I'm just going to bring a little bit more, gently just bring a little bit more value in on the edge of this catchlight here. So before we go any further, I'm just going to take that cold grey one, which is the 230. I'm just going to run that over the top of the pupil area here just to smooth it out. Again, it's going to make the blue a little bit more paler, but it's going to smooth it and blend it, and then we can come back in again with that dark blue and bring some more vibrancy in. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this cold grey one and I'm just going to put a layer of cold grey one over the catchlight there. And then I'm going to come back in with the dark indigo, and I'm going to bring another layer in here. And you'll find that as soon as you put that cold grey one in, it actually smoothed it out. So now when I'm bringing the dark indigo in, we're getting a smoother lay down. And the more you use the surface and the more you get used to its little qualities, and you know, the more you the more is like second nature when you start to work on it. You know, you just kind of know how to use the surface. So we've got that little bit of the pupil in there, which is working really nicely. Now, I just want to bring a tiny little bit of extra colour into this eye. I don't just want it to be grey. And for me, I'm just going to bring a weeny bit, but very gently, of brown ochre in. Now, the brown ochre, which is number 182, the brown ochre is a strong colour, is a very strong colour. But for me, I just want to have a little tiny glimpse of it in this eye. So we're going to use as gentle pressure as you can possibly muster. Okay, so hardly touching the surface. I'm going to hold my pencil. I've got a pencil extender. Well, it's a pencil extender. It's the middle of a poo bag roll. But I'm going to hold it right at the back. So I haven't got any control over my pressure really. And so I'm holding it right back. And I'm just going to very gently bring in a tiny amount of colour. So it's almost, you can't see it, but it's there, and it's just a tiny amount of colour. Okay, and I'm just going to bring that in over the eye. Really tiny amount of colour, and in here as well. And that's just going to give me just a little bit of colour, even though you can't really see it. And for me, that's perfect. Okay. So now what we can do is we can then start to come back in again and start to refine and start to add some more colour in the shadows and all of that kind of thing. So we're going to pick up our black for the first time. The black is 199. Okay. And we're going to bring a little bit more depth into where these shadows are here. So We're going to bring a little bit of dark into the edge here. So on top of the dark sepia, we're just going to bring that around. We need to go nice and dark in here. So the black, I use black all of the time. I do use it on its own, but I tend to use it on top of other colours to get a really, really nice richness. You know, you can choose to use black, or you can decide you don't want to use black. It's entirely up to you. For me, you know, why wouldn't you use black where you can make something much darker? I love the Polychromos black because it means that you can actually draw over the top of other colours just to make them slightly darker, which is amazing. You know, I can put this over the top of a red to make it a slightly darker red, on top of a blue to make it a slightly darker blue, or I could use extra pressure and have like a really, really rich black. So for me, it's a really important part of the choices, the pencil choices that I make. I'm just going to come down the side here and just bring a little bit more depth into the pupil area here. So it's still blue, but the black has just made it a little bit more rich. And then I'm just going to come down here as well. I'm just going to bring a little bit of that in there. I think the thing to remember when using pastel mat is that it looks so grainy to begin with, and it's really, really about getting used to it and just going, do you know what, I'm going to get used to it, and I'm just going to go with its qualities and how it works, because it's the most fantastic surface. It is the most fantastic surface. It really, really is. So we can see now that this is all starting to come together. We need to bring a little bit more depth into here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my Payne's Grey. So the Payne's Grey is the 181. Okay. We're going to come into the top. We're going to just make this a little bit on top of the eye here, slightly darker. So in here, we're just going to bring a little bit of the Payne's Grey in there. Very, very, very gently. All of the pressure is gentle. We're not using any hard pressure at all. The reason for that is because, for one, it means that we can get more layers in if we want to. For two, actually, if you use harder pressure, it can make the lay down of the pencil look even more grainy, which sounds a bit strange, but it's true. And then for three, you don't want to be using hard pressure on your pencils all of the time because it's going to affect your joints. I know for me, I've had to have physio in the past on my shoulder because when I used hot press paper, I had to use a lot of burnishing, and you know, it's not good for your joints. So you want to be using nice light pressure as much as you can. I'm just going to sort of make that a little bit rounder there, and then I'm just going to bring a little bit of the colour through here. And I'm going to bring a tiny, tiny little bit of that Payne's Grey. I'm just going to get a little bit more of a rounded edge on that catch light in there. Sorry about the noise if you can hear it. It's my son's just arrived home and his car is particularly noisy. Okay. So I'm going to bring a little bit of that Payne's Grey down into there as well. Okay, so I think this is looking quite nice, quite promising. I'm going to bring a little bit more of the sort of the patchiness, the mottliness into the eye here. So just gentle little squiggly pencil strokes. You don't have to get it exact. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. What I would say is, and this is something that I like to do with all of my eyes, is I like to keep just a little tiny extra bit of lightness at the bottom. It just tends to give it a little bit more life, basically. And I'm then going to use the Warm Grey 2 again, the 271. And I'm going to come in over the top of what I've done and very, 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 again, very gently I'm just going to bring a little bit of that warm grey in, so everything starts again just to smooth out. Now we've got to be careful not to burnish or use too hard a pressure, because if you do, everything's going to smudge together and you're just going to get a smooth grey eye. You want to keep some of that nice mottliness in there. And I'm going to come around the edge of that pupil as well and just make sure that that's sort of faded in there. It's not a big straight line. And then we can come down here. This has got a little less. So you can see I'm just going round and round with my pencil. Very, very light pressure. Very light pressure. And now we've got enough now to be able to start this little bit here that we've kept completely free. So we're going to take the Payne's Grey again, which is the 181. And we're just going to bring in this little bit of the dark of the eye here it's covered by that catch light. So it's lighter than the rest of the eye here, but it's kind of part of. So we're just going to bring that down there. Nice and gently. And then I'm going to use the warm grey 2 again over the top of that. Just to get that all nice and smoothed out. Okay. And then I'm going to use my cold grey 1, which is the 230. And I'm just going to bring a little bit of that cold grey 1 into the corner there. So I would tend not to use white or anything like that on whites of eyes. I do have a white that I am going to use in a minute, but just to lighten up rather than make something white. So we're just going to bring a little bit of that grey in there. And I'm just going to just bring a little bit of that. It's kind of coming onto the eye there. Probably will bring a little bit of white in there as well, so that we get an idea of the lightness. But this also goes to show that when we put this in, that we definitely need to make the eye area slightly darker as well. So I'm just going to use my Pablo white. Now I've chosen the Pablo white because it's much easier to get pencil over the top of it rather than a polychromos white. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring a little bit of that in over the top of that catch light there. Just lighten everything up a little bit. If you're not using pastel mat, then this bit you are gonna find this a little bit more challenging. It should work okay, but not like when you're using pastel mat, unfortunately. And then I'm just going to just bring a slightly stronger pressure in on the edge there. Okay, and then we can come back into this little eye area now. The bit that's sort of stuck underneath it, and we can just darken that up slightly. I'm going to use the Payne's Grey again, I think, and we can just come back into here and just again very, very, very gently. We've got an idea of that eye in there, but it's sort of faded because we've got the catch light over the top of it. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to darken the rest of the eye, the iris area. We're just going to darken that slightly. So we're going to use the warm grey 4 again, which is the 273, and I'm just going to come into here. And we want sort of almost like a line where that highlight is. And bring a little bit more of that down through there. And we're going to make this slightly darker as well. Right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that cold grey one again. I'm just going to bring it into this little area here. I'm also going to bring a touch of pink in there, but I'm just going to very gently, be careful not to bring in any of the black or the darker grey around it. So just be really, really careful with your pencil strokes as you bring that into there. And then I'm going to bring just a tiny bit, actually I'm going to bring a little tiny bit of the dark indigo around the bottom. So again, very light pressure. We're just going to bring a tiny, tiny little bit of colour in over the top of that blue. So it might look a little bit grainy, but that's okay. We're going to come back over the top of it with the cold grey again. And then I'm going to use the cold grey over the top again, just sort of gently. And then finally I'm going to bring some of the beige red. Let's make that nice and sharp. The beige red is the 132, used to be called light flesh. I'm going to bring a little tiny bit of that in over the top of the blue, which will make it slightly purpley. Very, very, very gently. Okay. And then we're going to come back in again with the black, and we're just going to make those really dark areas nice and dark again. So coming down here, I'm going to bring a little bit more shadow in on the edge there. So nice and gentle pressure down there. We get this nice dark area in the corner here. And then we're just going to bring a little bit more. Coming through there. Again, I'm just going to bring a little bit of shadow into there. And just sort of gently bring just a little bit of pigment up into the iris there, so that we've got that nice soft faded feel. And there, like that. And let's just bring a little bit around there. We can start to work on the hair area in there as well once we've got this little eye done. Okay, so I want to just bring the warm grey 2 back in, and I'm just going to bring a little bit more of that in there because I want to have the smoothness in here. So Vicky's asked me if I can talk about pencil sharpeners, which is a you know, a very important subject when it comes to coloured pencils. Like I say, I use the Swordfish multi-point, which is an electric pencil sharpener. It is quite expensive, and I think there are definitely other pencil sharpeners that you can use that aren't as expensive, definitely. I started off with a crank sharpener, so a hand cranked one, which worked really, really well for a while, and then I realised that actually an electric sharpener saves so much time, so that's why I went with the electric. And then I've also got a little tiny sharpener. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, here it is. So I also have this little tiny one, which is called the Cum Magnesium. This one here. It's about £2.50 from Amazon. It's got 2 holes, and all of my pencils fit into the smaller hole, even the really, really thick ones. This is perfect, and it's the only sharpener I'll use if I'm sharpening something like a Derwent drawing. So this is a Derwent drawing, very soft pencil, very fat lead, and I will only use this little pencil sharpener for sharpening that, because if I put this into my electric one, it's gonna completely ruin my electric pencil sharpener. It's going to break, the end's going to break off, so I only use one of these. But it's up to you. The pencil sharpeners, Derwent makes some good ones, Swordfish makes some good ones. You know, it's up to you whether you want an electric one or whether you want one like a little tiny one, or whether you want to use like a knife or something like that. But I tend to use my electric one. It's fantastic, absolutely fantastic. But like I say, I'm careful about the pencils that I put into it. So I wouldn't ever put in, I'm using the black now by the way, I wouldn't ever put in a really soft pencil into my electric one, because the likelihood is that it, you know, if it gets stuck, it's a bit of a nightmare to, you know, to change the blade or to get it back out again. So with my electric one, if something does break off in it, if I pull my pencil out and the lead's broken in it, I won't ever try and stick my pencil back in. Straight away, I'll actually pick my pencil sharpener up, the electric pencil sharpener, and I'll give it a bit of a shake, a bit of a bang on the desk to try and dislodge whatever's got stuck in there, and usually that works and I don't need to take it apart. So I think that's quite important to sort of understand how, you know, these little sort of tips on getting the best out of whatever it is that you're using. Right, I'm just going to come back in here and just make that a little bit darker again. And then we're going to just bring in a little bit of that that highlight in there. I'm also just going to bring, I've got the black here again, just going to bring it in on the bottom, just to bring a tiny little bit of shadow in there. The thing with pastel mat is that you can use things like cotton buds, you can use things like, what else can you use? Oh, no, where's the, I need to find the little paintbrush that I had. Where is it? That's there. You can use things like paintbrushes and cotton buds and paper stumps and all of that kind of stuff to help soften. Very often I'll use like a little brush like this, very soft little brush. This is a Rosemary & Co Evergreen Filbert Zero. Not that it matters at all. It's just a tiny little soft brush. And if I just want to soften something, I can just come in and just dab. So I could just dab on where I've got that little bit of black in there, and it will just soften it slightly. You've got to be very careful with pastel mat, because if you start brushing things, all of the pigment comes off. So I'd never use a brush to sort of sweep away pigment or anything like that. I'd always use a kneadable eraser, but on, you know, there's occasion where a little brush is actually quite useful. Okay, so now what I want to do is, before we add in any of the finishing touches, I just want to bring in this little, the rest of this little pupil area. So we've already put a layer of the cold grey one in. I'm going to actually put another layer in. So the cold grey one, we're just going to bring into there. And then we're just going to bring a tiny weeny little bit of that dark indigo to indicate the rest of the pupil area. And we've also got this little sort of, I don't know what it is. I don't know whether it's somebody's hand or what, I don't know. But there's a little tiny bit that kind of comes through into here. I'm gonna sort of just bring a little bit of a line in there. And then just very, very, very gently bring in a little bit of that blue around and then down here. Okay. Just a little bit more up at the top there. Always tricky when you've got a small area to work with. Okay, and then I'm going to bring a little bit of the white in, and I might even just kind of go over the top of this, but I'm not sure this is working actually, so I might just go over the top of that. Can you see how easy it is to get rid of it? And then we've got this area here, which is again really, really light. So this is the Pablo white. And that's just going to allow us to get that nice sort of feeling of that catch light that's going in over the top there. So I'm going to bring dark indigo again. Just going to bring a little bit more out here. A little bit more around here. And we're going to bring some dark sepia, which is the 175. And we're just going to come around here again, just make this a little bit darker here at the top. It's very much a case of building. And then I'm also going to get my warm grey 2 out again, and then we can just come in over the top. So it's, you know, you'll pop a colour in, you'll lighten it up, you'll pop a colour in, you'll lighten it up. So it's that's the kind of process, you know, the layering process. Light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. And then I'm going to come back in again with the dark sepia, and we're just going to bring a tiny little bit more of the that shadowy bit down at the bottom. Down in here. Okay, and a little bit darker down in here. So even though I'm using a dark pencil, I can use it very lightly, and it can, you know, it can be quite, you know, not come out quite as dark. So you've got a whole range of shades that you can use just with one pencil, which is great. Okay, so I'm just going to darken up down here. I'm still using the dark sepia. Darken up down there. Just come back in over that little bit there. And then we just put a few little blotches in there as well. Okay, and then what I want to do is I want to bring some of those little tiny white areas in. So I'm just going to darken this again around the bottom of that eyelid down here, so that we can actually get that nice white line in there. And I'm just going to come up here and just make this sort of slightly wider. And we can start to actually create a little bit of the detail that's coming out from around that eye. So, you know, thinking about how this works, your pencils want to have a little bit of a curve on it as it comes out and around from that you know, from the eyelid. There's never just a straight line. There's always a little bit of a curve. And if you can imagine when you're drawing, if you can imagine actually drawing on the surface of what it is that you're drawing, is really helpful, because it means that you can actually understand the structure that you're trying to create with your pencil. So if you're just sort of drawing straight lines on a flat plane, and imagining drawing straight lines on a flat plane, then it's all gonna, you know, you're not going to kind of get the idea of the perspective and the life and everything in there. So just imagining drawing, you know, what it would be like drawing on the inner eyelid of a dog, for example. It's going to be really helpful. So I'm going to come back in with the black again. I just want to darken again this top bit here. Okay. Yeah, so I think this is looking quite nice. What I want to do now is just soften again down here where we brought in that little bit of dark. So just bring that lighter colour in over the top, and then I'm going to start bringing in a little bit of the white to bring some of those lines in, and then we'll finish off with some of the black in there as well. So we're going to take the Pablo, and we want it really, really sharp. And while I'm at it, I'm just going to sharpen my black as well. Okay, so with the Pablo, we're going to just come and we're going to just lighten up this little bit in here, we're going to bring a nice white bit in there, down there, so that we can actually see the light. A little bit of a catch light in there. I'm going to bring just a tiny bit of white into this bit here where the white of the eye is there. Well, it's not the white of the eye, it's like the eyelid, isn't it? The third eyelid or whatever. Just a little tiny bit of that bright white in there. And a tiny bit of that bright white in here as well. I find the Pablo a really great pencil to be able to do that. Really, really, you know, it works beautifully. And then we're just going to bring a little bit of the white line into here. Now, before I start, if you're thinking, oh my goodness, my eye looks amazing, I love it, and you're a little bit daunted about putting this white bit in, don't worry about it. If you love your eye as it is now, just leave it. You know, it really, really doesn't matter. But I'm just going to start to bring a little tiny bit of that in, just as well, just to show you how you can get light over dark on pastel mat. So I want light pressure, so I'm not pressing hard. I want a sharp pencil, and I want to draw on quite a bit of quite a few layers. I've actually put that in the wrong place, which is a really great thing to demonstrate, because it means that I can show you how I can put that right. So can you see how I've gone too high up there? So I'm just going to come down a little bit there, and then I'm just going to bring my dark sepia in. I'm just going to cover that little bit up there. I'm just going to take my paintbrush and just dab it so we get a little bit more softness. And then I can take that white again. So pastel mat is the most forgiving surface. If you make a mistake, doesn't matter. I never ever rub out anything. So I only use my eraser for creating texture and highlights and stuff like that. I never use it for rubbing anything out, ever, 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 ever. I just, any mistake I make, and I make tons and tons of mistakes, I incorporate it, which is wonderful. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So we're pretty much there with this eye. I want to just bring a little bit more in on the outside, and then what time are we on? So we've had just over an hour for that, or an hour for that, and then we can start to look at the other eye. So I'm just going to bring the black in again. Let's just darken this little bit down here, darken in here. So you'll always hear me talking about values, about lights and darks, because they are the most important part for getting realism. And as much as you think that that you know details make realism, they really don't. It's your lights and darks that make realism. Vicky's just put here, can you use a gel pen? You can of course use a gel pen. I think I've got one here actually. No, I haven't. Oh no, I haven't. You can use a gel pen. What you've got to be really, really careful about when you use gel pens is that the majority of them are not light fast, and they're not archival. So what happens is you put a lovely white blob in or whatever, and then it goes yellow and then it looks horrible. The other thing to remember as well is anything other than pencil is going to look different on your drawing. So a white gel pen is going to look different to your pencil. Of course you can use anything you like, absolutely anything you like. And the other thing about gel pens as well is that some of them are really, really hard to actually get to work. So I tend to steer clear of anything like that. But it's not to say that you can't use it. You know, so just do your homework and make sure that whatever you're doing, it's archival and it's not going to go yellow and look awful. So I'm just going to put that little bit in there. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to work around the eye a little bit. Okay, just get a little bit of the fur in. So we get an idea of doing some of the fur, and then we're going to move on to the other eye, which, believe it or not, because it's only a tiny weeny little area, but that, oh, I've just spat all over my thing. That is actually going to be quite difficult. Eyes on an angle are always quite tricky. Not difficult, it's going to be challenging. Right, okay, so let's bring a little bit of extra colour into here. Now I'm going to use the Pablo charcoal. No, not. I'm going to use the Pablo Cocoa. I don't even know why I said charcoal. Pablo Cocoa, which is the 405. Really, really nice colour. It's quite, as the name would kind of imply, it's sort of like a chocolatey grey. It's a really lovely colour. And I'm going to bring a little bit of this in. Now the Pablos are hard, dry pencils, but they have a very different feel to the polychromos. They're very velvety and actually are beautiful for working on pastel mat. They really, really are. So if you're used to using polychromos and then you start to use some of the Pablos, you'll find that they work really well together with the polychromos, but they also work beautifully on their own. They're highly pigmented and they're just lovely. So I'm going to bring a little bit of the cocoa in on the top here. I'm using the cocoa really because of the feel, but also because of this lovely sort of rich colour, which I'd quite like to bring in. You know, a little bit of colour, especially when you're kind of drawing a grey dog, you want to bring a little bit of something in. And this just adds a little bit of something. So I'm just going to come down the edge here. Again, because we're using pastel mat, it means we can get light over dark. So, you know, don't worry about, oh, I've gone too dark there, I need to rub it out. No, just get your white in or your lighter colour in over the top and it works beautifully. So again, we're just going to come down here. Now this piece of pastel mat feels really smooth for me, but actually when we start laying the pencil down, it does have quite a lot of grain. So that to me means that it's just the layering process that I need to concentrate on. So it doesn't always look particularly pretty with these initial layers in. I'm just going to bring a little bit of, tiny bit of a curve in there underneath that line of the eye. And then we've got these lighter hairs coming down. What I don't want to do is try and draw all of the hair. This photograph is beautiful. There's so much detail in it, but I do not want to draw every single tiny hair. That would just completely and utterly overload my brain. You know, my brain would explode with all of that detail in. So what I want to do is get an idea of the detail and concentrate on where there are tiny changes in and shifts in light. That's what's going to give me a really, really nice realism, not trying to get every single tiny hair in. It is just going to be overkill. The other thing as well with a dog like this, it's a smooth coated dog. So, if you were looking at this dog normally, you wouldn't see all of the hair anyway. It's only because it's been taken with a beautiful camera that we've got all of this detail in there. So again, we've just got to be really, really, really careful that we don't go overboard with the detail, and that's what we concentrate on. And it's funny because you'd think, being a realism artist, the detail is what you'd concentrate on and the detail is what you're sort of going after. And I think when you first start drawing, it definitely is. It's definitely something that you think, it's all about the detail. But very soon you start to realise that it isn't. Right, so I'm now going to use the Pablo Light Grey. Another really fabulous, fabulous pencil. This isn't quite sharp enough either, so I'm just going to sharpen this one. And next week, if you join me, when we draw the ear, we'll really get into that layering process and how to, how much detail do we need to get in and how much can we just sort of, avoid. And I'm going to come in over the top of what I've already put in. And again, I'm going to use this as a lighter colour. And just sort of smooth out some of these little areas in here. So we've got an idea of how the fur is looking, but we're not going crazy and trying to get it all in. But what we can do is down here where the top of the eyelid is, we can actually bring a little bit of an idea of, there's little sort of short eyelashes in there. The light grey is quite a it's a light colour, but it's really, really good at getting in over the top of darks. so I'm just going to come down here. I'm just going to gently smooth out a little bit down here as well. So you can see when I'm using my pencil, I'm using it in a very sort of soft, sketchy way. You know, there's never sort of any, I'm never sort of being really, really specific about where I'm putting things, unless it's something very detailed like an eye. When it comes to fur, it's more about getting that feel of the fur and the, you know, the quality of the fur, rather than trying to get everything really, really specific. I'm just kind of coming in over the top of everything really and just smoothing that out a little bit. And then we can come back in again and darken some of those areas off. So concentrating on where there's light and where there's dark. I'm just going to use that. Bring a little bit of that in there as well instead of the white. So quite often we'll use the light grey instead of the white. You know, because it is a very light pencil. And I'll use this if I'm doing a black dog or something like this. I'll use this for highlights. I'm then going to use the Payne's Grey, which is the 181. And again, I am going to sharpen it because I want to get into this little tiny area down there. And what I want to do is I just want to start to kind of shade in and get more of the idea of the values in here. So we've got a nice sort of dark area in here, using the changes in the warm and cool hues. So, you know, the cocoa is very much a warm grey. The Payne's Grey is very much a cold grey. It's very bluey grey. You know, and I like to mix them because I think they work really, really well mixed. And with a dog this colour, you want to get as much interesting things into it, because otherwise you end up with just grey. And actually there are, you know, there's all sorts of different colours that you can get into here that are going to help. Again, I'm not drawing all of the tiny little hairs, but what I am doing is making sure that my pencil strokes are following the direction of the fur. And there's quite a lot of change in direction in this particular area of the dog here. And then what I can do is I can just kind of come up and underneath and create almost like what are little shadows. So we get an idea of the layering of the fur. And we've got this little bit of lighter coloured fur that's just a ridge underneath the eye. And then we've got the darker Payne's Grey underneath it. And if we just go up and under, we can create almost like little shadows and an idea of fur in there. That up and under really helps to consolidate things with your brain as well, because it gives you the idea that you're getting a shadow underneath something and that you're layering something. And then that then helps your brain understand what it is that you're drawing. It's about getting your brain on side. A lot of the time our brains will try and help us out, and it will draw what it thinks it sees. So if you say to somebody, draw me an eye, they will draw what they think is an eye. So it'll be, you know, like an eye shape, and they'll put some eyelashes on it, and they'll put a big round pupil, and they'll put the iris in there, and they'll, you know, maybe have a little bit of a crease in there or whatever. But actually, that's really not what an eye looks like. You know, what an eye looks like is concentrating on where the shadows are, really looking at the white of an eye and going, well, actually, that's not white at all. There's quite a lot of colour in there, or, you know, it's actually really, really dark. And where are the eyelashes coming from? They're actually not just poking out, and they're also different lengths and all of that kind of stuff. But if you allow your brain to do its thing, it normally does it not very well. And that's why we talk about looking at things in the mirror or drawing upside down, because then your brain doesn't actually recognise what it is that you're trying to draw. And then you have to literally draw what's in front of you. And it's very much a part of learning, you know, how to switch your brain off. I can't tell you how, gosh, I wish my brain would switch off all of the time. But if any of you are wanting to join me from the third in the academy, that this is how I teach, and I you know, I talk about it all of the time in my tutorials and everything like that. We go through everything. And I talk about how our brain wants to almost sabotage things all the time. You know, you'll think you're doing really, really well. You'll be really enjoying your drawing, and then all of a sudden your brain will pop in, and it will tell you something that's completely not true. And you've got to be really, really careful. You know, not to listen to your brain and believe what it's saying to you. And that's an awful lot of what I do brings into my tutorials. I mean, people think that my academy is for teaching people how to draw with coloured pencils. Actually, I would say the biggest thing that people get from the academy is how to switch their brain off, and how to learn to have more confidence and to have a better mindset. You know, because I've done so much on my own mindset, and I've bought into so many different things, and I share everything that I learn. So it's you know, a really, really important part of learning. So right, so I think this little eye is looking quite nice. I think it's all looking very very nice. I'm just going to add a little bit more movement, I guess, into this little area here, just so it doesn't look too static. So just a few sort of little soft lines in there, and a little bit more value at the top there, so we've got a bit of a graduation coming through. And then I'm just going to bring a little bit of that through in there, and then of course I'm going to finish this, and the rest of it will be in the academy. I can't tell you exactly when. I'm working on a tulip piece at the moment, which is quite exciting, and I've got a commission to do as well, but I'm hopefully going to finish this very, very soon, and then the rest of it, you know, will you be able to have in the academy, which would be great. Or of course you can just take everything that you've learned in the 2 sessions that I'm doing for free, and you can just, you know, you can carry on your own. So right, okay, so I think this is looking really nice, so we're going to move now onto this second eye. Now, what we've got to be really, really careful about when we're working on an eye on an angle like this, and this is the same for dogs, horses, cats, anything that's on an angle and you're drawing. You've got to be really careful that your brain doesn't take over and tries to draw the eye so it's looking straight at you. So let's just take a look at what this eye looks like. It's on an angle. We can only see a tiny bit of it. There's actually a big light area coming across the surface of the eye down here. And actually, in the whole scheme of things, it's pretty flat. It's pretty shallow. What I see an awful lot of, even with some pretty experienced artists sometimes, I see a big bulbous eye. So it becomes too round and it looks really weird. So we've got to be very, very careful. If we look at the angle of the eye here, you see that there's that, it's quite a steep, it's not obviously not you know, it's not vertical, but it's quite a steep angle here, and we've got to make sure that when we've completed it, that angle is the same all the way down. There's a bit of a curve on this bit that goes through into the nose area there. That's the little bit of the cheek going through there. We've got to be really, really, really careful. And this is where it's important to draw what you see, not what you think is there. Like I said, I see an awful lot of people ending up drawing the eye as if it's actually looking at you. So it's this sort of shape, and it's really not. Okay, so we're going to start, I think, with the dark sepia again. We're going to be really careful as to the initial marks that we put down on this eye. We're going to start with the little curve on the top here, which is the inside of the eyelid. So we're just going to take a deep breath and we're going to go for it. So we're just going to bring a little bit of a curve in there, nice gentle pressure. And we're just going to try and make sure that that curve is correct. It's definitely worth spending the time making sure that the lines that you're putting down are correct. If you put a tiny line down that and you think, oh, that's not correct, with something like this, it is worth taking it off. And if you were to take this line off, I would recommend using something like Scotch tape. This is a roll of Scotch Magic tape that's got some dog hair stuck in it, and looks like something else. And basically you just take a little piece of the Scotch tape on and you lay it over the top of your line like that, and then you colour over I'll do it. Mine was in the right place, but I'm just going to do it. You colour over the top of it and it will lift it off. Better really than any sort of eraser or anything like that. So I'm going to put that back in again. Just nice and gently, very, very, very gently. Scotch Magic tape is awesome. Always, always, always check that it's not going to damage your paper, because it could very well take off a layer of the surface of your paper. And then what we're going to do is we're just, again, if you look at your photograph, you can see there's a little line coming this way that then attaches to the corner of the eye. Okay, so we've almost got this little sort of shape at the top. It's like a weird little X. And we just need to be very careful that we don't get those angles incorrect. Really, really careful that we don't get those angles incorrect. Okay, so that's the top bit. And then we can just bring this a little bit further out. We can actually use it so that we've got a little bit of tufty fur, so it's not a line, so it makes it a little bit softer. We can just bring a little bit of tufty fur here. And then we've got a tiny bit of the sort of the top of the eyelid there. Got to be really careful. I don't want to put too dark a mark in here. And actually, I'm just going to move. Take a little bit of that out. So the kneadable eraser that I use, this one here, the Faber-Castell one, it's my favourite one. It's brilliant. It comes in a little box like this. And I have mine on subscription. So every 4 weeks I get 4 more, and I'm so glad I do, because the dog eats all of them. I've got to be so careful about keeping these away from the dog, because I think it's Nellie, she just comes in and eats them. Okay, so we've got this little bit up here. I'm just going to darken slightly. With something like this, less is always more. Okay, always more. So the less information you can put in, the better. And then we're just going to come in on the bottom area here. So again, very, very gently, we're just going to pull in this bottom little eyelid bit. Again, we're drawing what's in front of us, not what we think our brain is looking at. So nice and gently. Less is more, gentle pressure, simple mark. Perfect. Okay, well, not perfect, because nothing's ever perfect, but it's not bad. Okay, so we've got that there, which is great. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my warm grey 4. No, I'm not. I'm going to take my cold grey. I think I put down cold grey 5. So either cold grey 5 or cold grey 4, whatever you've got really. But something that's a little bit more bluey. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little tiny bit into the edge here, this little bit in here. So I'm going to come up here slightly, which is going to be where the eye finishes. And I'm just going to be very, very gently bringing a little bit of this cool grey, just so that I've got some context and a bit of a holder. You know, I don't have to go crazy and do loads of detail or anything like that. I just want some context, and that's all that is. Okay. And again, I could do the same up here, so I can keep the same pencil, really, really nice light pressure. What we don't want on the edge of the head here, because at some point it goes out of focus up here. So we want really nice soft pressure. We don't want any hard lines. So even on the edge of the dog's head here, we want it to be nice and soft. We want it to be a really, really nice, soft, soft pressure, soft colour coming through. Okay. And there. and then I'm just going to bring a little bit of that down here as well. So again, we've got some context as to where this eye is going to be coming. Always try and make things easier for you. You know, don't try and make things really, really hard. Drawing's hard enough, so don't make things harder. And we're just going to bring a little bit of that in. So we've got some nice context in there. Obviously, we need to do a lot of work around that, but we've got some nice context in there. So the next thing we want to do is actually look at the eye. And I want to start with the cold grey one. Again, we want to be quite sharp. It's sharpish. And what we're going to do, and again, we've got to be really, really careful with the shaping of this. What we're going to do is we're just going to bring a line around the outside of the eye, which is that sort of the lovely shine of the eye, that glassiness. We've got to be careful that it doesn't become too bulbous. So we're just going to bring a nice little bit. That's all you need there at the moment. And actually it can just come around there slightly. So that's all we need. A little bit up there as well. So that is the edge of the eye, okay? So then what we're going to do is we're going to take I'm going to use the Payne's Grey and the Warm Grey 4. Okay, so we're going to take the Payne's Grey, which is the 181. And you can see there's sort of like a curve. All of the curves are pretty similar. You can see there's like we've got that catch light in the corner here. So we're going to again be really, really careful. And I'm going to bring the Payne's Grey down very gently, little tiny round pencil strokes. And I'm just going to bring a little bit through next to that little bit of cold grey one that we put in, which we can bring some more of, which is fine. Just going to bring a little bit of that in down here. You want to have the gentlest of pressure because this is very subtle colour coming through here, very subtle colour. You can see down at the bottom it all sort of drifts off. And then we're just going to come around here as well. And this is sort of slightly stronger. Obviously we're working in quite a small area, but that's sort of a little bit stronger there. And then what we can see is this bottom bit down here, it's got that nice sort of browny tinge to it, grey browny tinge to it. So we're gonna kind of work on bringing that in as well. But hopefully what we've got now is we've got this area where we've got an idea of how this is going to work. So I'm just going to pull a little bit darker into here. Again, be really, really, really gentle with your pressure. Really gentle with your pressure. It's going to look naff to begin with. You're going to be sitting there going, this is absolutely awful. But that's because, you know, you can't make something look realistic. Particularly something as simple as this eye. And actually, the more simple something is, the more challenging it is to make it look realistic, because you've got to be able to kind of emulate that simplicity, but it takes a huge amount of work to get there, and you've got to make it look like you've just put a couple of marks in, and that's what the challenge is, you know, making something look really, really, really simple. I know when I've critiqued pieces, I think I critiqued a piece this last week, and I was like, this looks amazing. It looks really less is more. You know, you've made it look like it's been effortless to create it. However, in reality, it's probably taken you hours pulling a few strands of hair out at the same time. So let's just come back down here. Really, really tiny, tiny, tiny pencil strokes. I'm going to bring the cold grey back in, cold grey 1 back in a minute, and we're going to go over the top of it. Before I do, I'm going to use my warm grey 2, which is the 271. And again, I'm just going to bring it in over the top in here very, 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 very gently. We're going to lose a little bit of the depth of colour in there, and then I'm just going to come round and we're going to bring a little bit of that warm grey 2 into here. We're going to be careful not to lose this little light bit at the bottom. It's really, really key that we don't lose that. We can bring a lighter colour in over the top, but if we can isolate that, that's a really good thing to do. Even with pastel matte, you know, if you can isolate some of these lighter areas, really, really important. I'm going to use the warm grey 4, and I'm just going to darken the edge of the eye here. Just going to bring a little bit more down in here so we really get to see where that highlight is. Again, make things easy for you. Put stuff in that you might not be working on at that particular moment, but just bring a little bit of something in so that you understand how that works alongside what it is that you're trying to draw. You know, I'm a big fan of bringing context into your pieces. I'll have people, you know, ask me for some help, and they'll go, oh, I've done this, but I'm just not sure it looks right. And I'll suggest that they move away from that, bring a little bit extra in somewhere else that's next to it, bit of colour, bit of, you know, bit of light and dark, bit more context, and they'll see how, what a difference it makes when you've got the you know, that something next to it, and how it just brings it all to life. Right, okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring a little bit more, I'm going to bring a little bit of, I'm going to use the Payne's Grey again, and we're just going to darken in here. So we put that light, that warm grey in again. So we're just going to darken in there, nice and gently. Darken up here, nice and gently. And we're going to darken down here, nice and gently. As gentle as you possibly can go. It's like you're whispering on the paper. It's like you're drawing with a feather rather than a sharp, hard instrument. You know, really, really look at how you're drawing on there. So you can see we've kind of lost a little bit of context in there again. So I'm going to bring my, I'm actually going to bring my cold grey 1 in. I'm just going to bring a little bit of that cold grey in, middle bit there. It's always a little bit tricky when you're working with eyes and they're relatively small. This would be sort of like a size for a good size for a portrait. Sort of A4-ish size, 21 by 29 centimetres, that kind of thing. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cold grey 1 and I'm just going to fill that catch light in there. Okay, you can see we need to go much darker here. And then I'm going to bring a little bit more, in fact I think I'm going to use the cold grey 2. Cold grey 2 is 231, and I'm going to use a little bit of cold grey 2 coming in on this side of the eye here. So again, just be really careful not to allow it to become bulbous at all. And we're just going to bring a little bit of that colour in, and it can just gently bleed and soften into that darker bit of eye colour in there. Just coming in around there. Down there. Okay, and then I'm going to bring a tiny bit of that brown ochre. Okay, so I completely understand that some of you aren't using a pastel matte. However, what we're doing here is whatever paper you're using, use these same techniques. Okay, you'll be absolutely fine. Pastel matte is a unique surface. It is a beautiful surface to use, and if you're using like a hot press paper or something like that, everything that we're doing here, apart from getting the really light areas over dark, are going to work for you. If you're struggling getting the light over dark, the best thing to do there is to keep areas isolated. But I teach on 3 different surfaces. So I teach on pastel matte, I teach on drafting film, and I teach on hot press paper as well. And what I try to do with my tutorials is, so say somebody's done a tutorial that I've created on pastel matte and they've done it on a hot press paper. What could happen, the scenario that could happen is that they'll post in in the Facebook group, in the membership Facebook group, and they go, oh, I'm doing this particular tutorial, but I'm doing it on hot press paper. What do I need to do? And then me and a whole raft of other members are going to come in and go, well, you could try this, you could try that. You would definitely have somebody come in and go, oh, I did that tutorial and I actually did it on a hot press paper. This is what I did and it worked really well. That's what's amazing about the Ignite and Academy community, the amount of help that you get, you know, from me as well, but obviously I can't answer everybody's questions, but from the members who have been there, who've used the tutorials and have come, you know, and they will come in and help. So it's the most amazing supportive community. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. It blows my mind how amazing people are. You know, giving their time to help others is wonderful. Okay, so brown ochre, the 182. What we're going to do, very similar to this eye here, we're just going to gently just touch in a tiny amount of colour in the bottom here. Very gently. So that you can almost not kind of even, you wouldn't even know that we've used a colour in there. So really gently putting that colour in there, which has worked really nicely. Again, I just want to bring in a little bit more colour down here, but to get the colour to look a little bit softer, I want to just use my cold grey 1 in, oh, actually that's cold grey 2, cold grey 1 in over the top of the colours, the greys that I've put in here, so that it just smooths it out a little bit. So I'm just going to bring in a little bit of that. Now, who's hammering? I'm guessing it's my next door neighbour that's hammering. However, if it's one of my children, they're going to be in trouble. Just coming in through there, which is fine. So I just, this context here, I just want this to be a little bit smoother so it actually works next to the eye, because we want to get a little bit more information in this, a little bit of a highlight there. So just coming down here, we've got a line that's sort of slightly lighter coming in here. And then I'm just going to bring a little bit of colour in there as well. And then I'm going to use this cold grey 1 down here too. In there. Okay. So we can see in the eye here, what I want to do is I just want to bring just a little bit more of that Payne's grey in over here. And then we can just bring a tiny little bit coming through there as well. And then I'm going to use the I'm going to use the dark indigo, which is a proper blue rather than a cold grey. I'm going to use the dark indigo, which is 157, and we're just going to bring a little tiny bit of blue. Again, very gently, as lighter pressure as you can muster. Really light pressure coming through there. Just going to darken that a little bit. Hang on. Sending my son a text to see if it is actually him hammering. I'm not sure whether you can hear it. I'm just coming through there, and just a tiny bit of blue down into the bottom here, and then I'm going to bring some more of that sort of cold grey in there. And a little bit of blue into there as well. I don't want to put too much in because I don't want to end up sort of, you know, like the less is more is really important. So getting it in the right place is really key. And then I'm just going to use that cold grey 2 again, just to come around the edge here. In there. Coming through there. Okay. And then I'm going to use the white. just to sort of smooth over this little area here. So we're not making it white, we're just smoothing over so that it's nice and glassy. And then I'm just going to bring a little bit of that up in there as well. Coming through there. Okay, so that'll do for now. And then let's just darken up around the eye there. So I'm going to take my warm grey 4, nice and sharp, and we're just going to darken up this little bit in here. Again, your edges want to be nice and soft. You don't want a big, strong edge. And wherever you can, where it can sort of fade off into the paper, that's a really lovely thing to do. And then I'm just going to take the dark sepia, just make this a little bit darker down the bottom here. Again, just try not to kind of go into the eye area. I just want to make this sort of slightly darker. And sort of resist, if you can, the temptation to draw a big line around the eye. It's going to look much better if you can have sort of like a soft edge around there. So I'm just going to bring a little bit more context into the fur in here, so it's darker. And then up and around. Coming through there. Want that nice sort of softness in there as well. So wherever you've got anything sort of where you've got I'll just bring a little bit of my putty eraser in actually just to soften that line there. Where you've got a dark coming through to a light, you want to have a nice softness rather than a stop-start. It's always going to look nicer. And then let's just come up to the top there, top of the eye, and let's just darken that slightly, so we can just darken that a little bit. And we can just bring that little bit through there as well. Just be careful you don't go crazy with the dark. Let's just bring a little bit of an eyelashy thing going on in there. This is the dark sepia I'm using here. I'm just going to bring a little bit of that darker colour in. And then I'm going to use my warm grey again. And then as you kind of work through the fur, it's then a case of sort of layering, you know, like we were doing before. Layering, 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 light over dark, and finally sort of creating the idea of details. Okay. So that's pretty good. Let's just get, this is the dark indigo again. I just want to be careful not to tinker too much. If you're a tinkerer, then just be careful, because you can sort of you know, overwork areas, and it's much better if you can, you know, if you can get it so that it's just everything in the right place, but it's not overworked. I always think if you look at something and you think, I'm happy with that, put your pencils away, step away, because otherwise, you know, it could very well end up, you know, becoming overworked. I'm just going to use a little tiny bit of my warm grey. Again, I just want to get a slightly more fuzzy connection between the bottom of that eye there, where that lighter area is. So I'm just gently, that's better. Okay, so we've just got enough information in that second eye. We've got a nice, you can see here again, we've got that nice angle coming through. We might need just a tiny weeny little bit more of that dark coming around the eye there. That's it. And then we can just kind of leave it at that, I think. Just bring a little bit of that cold grey in, just to soften again at this edge here. And there we have two really, really quite nice eyes. These are nice eyes to draw. They're unusual in colour, so it means you've got to really think about the colour that you're using. it means that, you know, usually sort of, well, I'm saying usually, you know, with an awful lot of dog breeds, the eyes are sort of like brown, and you've got the oranges and everything like that in. This eye in particular, obviously is sort of quite grey, but it's quite nice to bring some of that colour in. And I think we've done quite a nice job on creating it, I have to say. I think it's worked out really, really well. So hopefully that has been an enjoyable session. Basically, when we're drawing eyes, I'll just kind of recap a little bit. When we're drawing eyes, I like to start with the outside so that we get the shaping correct, we get the sizing and everything like that correct. You know, I also like it so that if I take a photograph, it doesn't look weird. If I step away and I come back, it doesn't look weird. If you're anything like me, whenever I look at something out of context, so if I draw an eyeball and it's just sitting there floating on the paper, it can very often end up looking like something else. Like a lot of the time, it'll look like a weird bird with a beak. And then I can't unsee it. And then it kind of, my brain starts to sort of, you know, go a bit weird. So that is a big reason why I like to draw the outside first. It also helps to get the shape and everything like that correct. Nothing worse than drawing an eyeball, spending ages and ages drawing an eyeball and then realising it's the wrong shape. You know, so yeah, I like to get my outside done first. Layering gently, so start nice and gently. Really, the pressure is key. So starting with that lovely light pressure. As you build up your layers, your pressure does increase slightly, but you never get to the point where you're using really hard pressure. Pressure comes from sort of like this, from this here through to sort of something probably like that. But you never get to the point where I'd use so much pressure that I draw blood, you know, because that is going to damage the surface you're drawing on, particularly pastel matte, and it's going to damage your joints. I do understand that with paper like surfaces like Fabriano Artistico Hot Press, you do have to use pressure, and that's one of the reasons why it's not one of my favourite surfaces, I have to say. I have bought some Bristol Smooth, which is going to be quite an interesting thing to do, because I used to draw on smooth paper, and we're going to see how that goes on, which would be quite interesting. I think I'm going to do some monotone work on that, maybe do some hair and use erasers and stuff like that in it. And then when drawing an eye on an angle like this, less is always more. And really concentrating on the fact that it's on an angle and that the eye is relatively flat. So getting your curve in there is really key. Be careful that it doesn't kind of poke out and become this big bulbous eye, because there is nothing worse than looking at a lovely portrait and it's got a big bulbous eye poking out. I see it all of the time with horses, dogs. You know, just be really careful that you get that nice sort of flatness when you're looking at a 3/4 view like this. And don't be scared about using a little bit of colour. Don't be scared about using black. Black's, you know, a really good pencil to be using to sort of darken little bits and pieces. And try not to get bogged down with the detail straight away. Try to really concentrate on getting all of those lovely layers, looking at the values, so your darks and your lights and everything. So I think we will stop there. Hopefully that's been enjoyable. I'd love you to share your work. You know, if you want to share your work, you can use the hashtag Bonny's Live Draw Dog Eyes, and Bonny's with a Y. You know, and you know, share wherever you want to do. If you want to credit the photograph is from Pexels. So it's one of those the royalty-free, copyright-free sites, and it's from Pexels, which is a really nice site actually. They've got some beautiful photographs in there. And then hopefully you will come and join me next Sunday, same time, and we're going to carry on with the same dog, but we're going to be drawing the ear area, and then I'm going to finish the rest of the dog off as a tutorial that will be within the academy. So thank you all ever so much. Really enjoyed this afternoon's drawing session. I love these sessions, I really do. Teaching live is one of one of the best things that I do. I absolutely love it. So hopefully you've enjoyed it. Hopefully it has been useful and you've got an idea as to how to take your pencils a little bit further. And thank you all ever so much, and I will see you all very soon. Okay, bye.